Please find your seats. The meeting will begin shortly.
The important thing about this meeting is that all the participants who came here from across the world were told in advance that they would be asked to make a specific commitment, to take action, and to declare that commitment in writing.
Commitment. The Clinton Global Initiative was founded on commitment.
We are excited to announce our commitment.
Our commitment.
Commitments.
The commitment we are all making here today.
Commitment to one another, to solving problems, to changing the world through action.
All of our partners here commit
to promote women's rights by using media.
To provide clean energy from organic waste streams.
To scale financial empowerment globally.
To save African elephants.
To improve cancer treatment around the world.
To saving one life every hour by providing clean drinking water.
When you educate a girl, not only does she transform her own household, but she transforms her society.
Commitment is an idea that is rooted in trust, in a sense of community, and a belief that we must work together.
All these little things some people may say are incremental turn out to be a great big mountain.
So now, the Clinton Global Initiative gathers again to recommit, to demonstrate that our global partnerships represent what true commitment is. Ideas that lead to action. Actions that change lives.
This whole initiative is in the how business. How are you going to do it so that you maximize the positive impact in other people's lives?
Your voice is your weapon against injustice.
Be persistent and never ever give up.
The most important title is not president or prime minister. The most important title is citizen.
Go and create the future you want to live in.
And let me remind you once again that one book, one pen, and one teacher can change the world.
This is our moment, girls.
In this new moment, commitment matters more than ever.
The scale of the commitment matches the gravity of the challenge.
Look at all the good that's been done because you made a decision about what to do with your mind and your heart.
One small commitment to action can change a life, can change a community, can change a country, can change the world. So the question is, how will you commit?
Please welcome President Bill Clinton.
Thank you very much. First, good morning. And thank you for coming to our 2022 meeting after a hiatus of 6 years. Whether you've been to all the other meetings or whether this is your first one, I want to thank all of you for joining Hillary, Chelsea, our staff, and me in trying to recreate what I think of as the spirit of CGI. That through incredible work by many of you and others over the last many years has improved the lives of millions of people. I also want to give a special thank you to all of our sponsors. They have played always an important role, but this year particularly important, because this year we have a different mixed, we have a lot of our old friends. We have a lot of people in very prominent positions. We also have more young social entrepreneurs from more places than ever before. Because of our sponsors, we had the money to pay for people's expenses to come here from around the world, people who never would have been able to do it otherwise. So we will present a different face to the world. I know that every one of you, each in your own way, could speak just as well as I could about the challenges we're facing today. You all know lots of important things about the threat of climate change, how it grows more serious every day, how we're dealing with the beginning of probably another really rough hurricane season in the Caribbean. And you know that the COVID-19 pandemic sort of ripped the cover off a lot of longstanding health inequities across borders. You know that we haven't defeated it yet, even though we're getting there. Most of you know there are more refugees and displaced people in the world than at any previous time in human history. And you certainly know that inclusive democracy is under assault in every corner of the earth. You know, there's still too many people who are really smart, willing to work hard, full of their own dreams, but who don't have access to the education, employment, and other access to equality opportunities the rest of us take for granted. So we all know about the challenges we face. And we even know usually what are the most effective ways to address the challenges. What humanity everywhere has a hard time with today is figuring out how to turn our good ideas into real changes in other people's lives. And one of the reasons that I have always believed in CGI and always wanted to go beyond the kind of harsh, polarizing name-calling that characterizes so much of the political debate in the world today is that when it's all said and done, I think that unless you can answer the how question, the rest of it doesn't amount to much. You can go give yourself a PhD in the knowledge of social problems or the challenges we face, but if you want to do something about it, you've got to be able to answer the how question. So we decided to start this CGI by getting back to the first question and hoping that it will keep everybody in a positive frame of mind and an inclusive frame of mind. And in the face of fierce gridlock in country after country after country, which puts our future at great risk, I think the idea that we could come together and say, we're going back to first principles, looking forward, looking to the future. If you have something to contribute to our past understanding, that's fine. And if you want to say you are changing your position, that's fine. But nobody has to do anything but figure out how to work with someone else to make good things happen. And I think there's been quite enough of all the other stuff. And there are very many smart people devoting themselves every day of the world to either making fun of or skewering all the poor, less than perfect people who have gone astray. Somebody needs to show up and make something good happen. And that's what we're trying to do. And we're trying to give everybody a chance through all these partnerships to find people who have skills and knowledge and resources they don't have so that you can both contribute together. And maybe there'll be 2 people in a commitment, maybe there'll be 20. One of our most famous American commitments a couple of years ago was when Barack Obama was president, and he asked the Congress for 100,000 new teachers in the STEM fields, and they basically said no. So we had 24 partners in our CGI for America joined together, and poof, they produced 100,000 teachers and then some. And that's the kind of thing we have to focus again on. I think that's the lesson of the first decade plus when we held these meetings. We were committed to creative cooperation. We're all living through in one way or the other the terrible burdens being borne by the people of Ukraine today. And there will be a lot of commitments here to try to help. But you can say, well, that won't solve the whole problem. That's right. But don't forget the legacy of the first 12 years. When we got to the end and we got someone who had no dog in the hunt to do, and you have to forgive me if I sometimes slip off into my colloquial past, to do an analysis of all these commitments and which ones had been kept and which ones were in the process of being kept. And they said, after 12 years, that you and people like you had helped approximately 400 million people in over 180 countries. You, in some way, if you just keep working at it, the numbers pile up, the human consequences pile up, the lives you saved, the lives you lifted, the futures you claim for young people. Partnerships between government and business and philanthropies and NGOs at the community level, it just adds up. That's sort of the simple idea we started with all those long years ago. And I think we got better at advancing it as we got along, and I have nothing but gratitude and thanks for all the people who worked on this edition, because I think it's going to be better in some ways than what we've done before. And as I said, it's going to be younger and more diverse by just basically investing more in a travel budget. Something to be said for that. So let's just keep in mind when we began that the challenges we face are steep, but they pretty much have been steep for a long time now. And CGI is always, and has always been, about what we can do, not what we can't do. We have tried never to make the perfect the enemy of the good. We have tried never to pretend we could do something that we couldn't. But we have also tried never to pretend that because we couldn't solve a whole problem, we shouldn't do our part. The truth is, we have to find more and more ways today for everyone to play a part. We have to find ways for everyone to play a part. You think about all the things that are going on today for which there cannot possibly be a simple solution where someone just sits down and writes a check and there's the money and there it is and it goes away. Because there are too many competing claims in an urgent set of priorities for today and tomorrow. So I think we just ought to say we're grateful for the chance to come back together. We still think cooperation beats conflict. And we're going to have a good time trying to do it. Now it's my great honor and pleasure to introduce somebody that, to me, truly embodies the best of CGI through his work to improve lives in some of the most impoverished communities on earth. A longtime friend of our family, Kennedy Odede, founder and CEO for Shining Hope for Communities, has made a huge difference from almost the beginning of his very young life. And he's here to help us kick off. So Kennedy, come on out and let's give him a hand.
By 2045, the world's urban population is projected to reach 6 billion. Without the capacity to handle this growth, urban poverty will explode. We are on the precipice of an urban spring. And emerging economies like Kenya will have to endure this burden, leading to further inequality in areas like climate, gender, access to vaccines, as well as lack of basic human needs. My name is Kennedy Odede, and I grew up in Kibera, one of the largest slums in Africa. Surrounded by devastating poverty, I know what it means to be urban poor. In 2045, will there be still a child just like me facing the same devastating poverty that I did all those years? I have hope that this will not be the case if we take action together. Yet currently, resources are constrained. They are not reaching communities in need. We are letting this happen. How are we letting this happen, honestly? It is time to get unstuck. I am the founder of Shining Hope for Community, SHOFCO, the largest grassroots movement in Kenya. And despite the situation I grew up in, I was filled with hope by my community around me. I believed in our abilities. I knew we could do something about it if others would only listen. And SHOFCO was born. 15 years ago, I got the opportunity to meet President Bill Clinton. He asked me, "What can I do for you?" What a question, right? He was putting trust into my hands as a community leader. He was listening to me. And I said, allow me to be part of the Clinton Global Initiative, CGI. Why? Because I knew at that point my ambition to create an urban poor movement was not something I could do alone. It will take collective action. And at a CGI meeting in 2013, I started a call to action to provide clean water to the communities in Kibera. Because of commitment to action made at that meeting, communities members in Kibera and beyond now have access to clean water. Today, my call to action is fund local grassroots organization. That's how they'll be able to achieve sustainable and long-term impact. Because of all of us in this room, let's be honest, we are not the answer. To come to Unstuck, we must trust people to solve their own problems. Just like President Clinton put trust in me all those years. They are the answers. They have the ability to drive local agendas that will lead to appropriate and effective pro-poor policies. I know that because I'm a living proof. Here I'm on this stage, and look what I have done, because someone simply listened to me. So my question to you is, how will you give power to the people? Thank you.
I'm Allison Moore, CEO of Comic Relief US, where we are on a mission to break the cycle of intergenerational poverty in the US and around the world. To us, taking action together means creating powerful shared experiences that spark a movement and turn our dream of a safe, healthy, educated, and empowered future for all into a reality. We must break down the structural barriers that trap families in a cycle of intergenerational poverty and address its root causes. We must also build initiatives that can deeply engage a new generation of changemakers. So that's why we are making a commitment to action to deliver $1 billion of social impact over the next 10 years. But we can't achieve this alone. Partners like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation have joined us in our vision to create new campaigns for the next generation of donors. We're investing in innovative models for social impact and partnering with organizations like yours to make it happen. Together, I know we can drive long-term change for children and families and communities across the world. So join us in taking action together for a just world free from poverty.
Hi, I'm Kenneth Cole, founder of MHC, the Mental Health Coalition. We are a coalition of the most passionate and influential organizations, brands, and individuals who have joined forces to end the stigma surrounding mental health and to change the way people talk about and care for mental illness. Taking action together is at the core of the coalition's mission. We believe, as the African proverb goes, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
And now, please welcome Jose Andres, Lorraine Powell Jobs, Prime Minister Mia Mottley, and Fareed Zakaria.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming. I think we're all enjoying just the idea and the reality of being together, and I hope you're all taking advantage of the fact that you can actually do this in person. No Zoom, you don't have to unmute, you can just talk. So we are going to get right to it because we have a limited amount of time and these extraordinary panelists. None of whom need an introduction, and in the interest of time, I'm not going to give one. Prime Minister Mottley, you are the leader of a nation. You have managed to handle your country extraordinarily well, but you are also an internet sensation. Your speech to the United Nations last year on climate change went viral. And I wanted to ask you about that issue. Because to me, it's part of the problem. And I'll explain what I mean, which is that particularly younger generation seems like the way you demonstrate your support for climate change is by watching a video on Twitter. But what it's going to take is something considerably more than that. And it does seem as though we're at a stage now where everyone is willing to check the box. Yes, climate change is real and it's a problem. But then when you ask them to do something about it, to pay a price in particular, it becomes hard. you know, and there's a sense of, but I like that video of Prime Minister Motley. Isn't that enough? What will it take to actually get the kind of action which does involve some paying of prices, some sacrifice on climate change?
We need to sensitize. Thank you. We need to sensitize them, Fareed, and we need to...
Maybe Laureen, does your mic work?
I'll let you, yes.
Yes, all right. In the spirit of sharing.
Thank you. Thank you. We've got to share everything. Thank you very much, Fareed, and we need to sensitize them and educate them, and it's going to require a longer conversation than we have here today. We can't do it in 4 column inches. We can't do it in 60-second sound bites. And we need to let them appreciate that they're the ones who are going to be the victims of the crisis. We're already seeing it. When I was young, Third World had a song called 96 Degrees in the Shade, and we thought that was the example of real heat. This summer, the people in the North Atlantic countries understood what real heat was. So that unless we can have those conversations, and they have to be nuanced conversations, because guess what? As much as we are committing to net zero, we have not the capacity to get there without the production and supply of goods. And I've given my country the commitment that we will have electric cars with a tax-free holiday, but we can't get access to the cars. We've said that every Barbadian should have the right to have photovoltaic panels on their roofs, but we can't get access to the batteries with the lithium to do it. So the world is in this disconnect between commitment and capacity. And regrettably, if we don't have full conversations with young people, they will be apathetic to the cause, and they will not rise to the occasion of action. I hope that we can engage them, and against the backdrop of what they're seeing, that they will rise, because if they don't, they're going to pay the ultimate price.
Tell us a little more about what specifically you want the world to do for Barbados to help it manage through climate change.
Barbados and all other developing countries facing climate change need to finance their way to the realities of adaptation to a new world. No private sector entity is going to go and help us deal with coastal defenses. And at the same time, we're only dealing with this because the G20 countries literally have, through the Industrial Revolution, put the world in this position with greenhouse gases. If this was a private action, we would be suing them in tort. But we can't. And we say internationally that the polluter pays principle is relevant. But we can't get a single discussion with the world on loss and damage. And we've been talking about it for almost a decade. We can't get proper commitments on adaptation. And above all else, we have a World Bank that has forgotten that it is the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development and does not admit of trying to fight global public goods such as protecting countries against the climate crisis. Now, how can you have Barbados and Bahamas being denied from access from the World Bank to be able to borrow the money to ensure that we can prepare ourselves for the climate realities? It's madness. And if you tell me your own bank says that for every dollar spent, we save $7 from rebuilding, should we be hit with a climate event? When we're told, as we're being told, well, you can have access possibly after the event. Well, what are you giving it to us for? To pay the undertaker? We want the money before to save lives.
One of the climate-related crises that took place 5 years ago, in fact, I think 5 years ago tomorrow, the 5th anniversary, was Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. I don't think most people realize, but I think it devastated 80% of Puerto Rico's food supply. Jose, explain how you launched into action when that crisis happened and how you were able to substantially alleviate the problem. I think Laureen's is the only one that works, so we'll all have to, maybe there's a metaphor there.
Hola. Well, yeah, what happened 5 years ago really reshaped what World Central Kitchen, the organization we founded after the 2010 earthquake in Port-au-Prince, in ways I never expected. When we landed there 3 days after Maria destroyed huge parts of Puerto Rico, what we saw was real devastation with no electricity, no ATMs, no banks, no gas stations. The entire island paralyzed, even people that wanted to help, no ways to do it. So I always say that big problems, they have very simple solutions. When something like this happens, you can do two things. You can go into a big room, bring the experts, and start meeting, and start planning. And then it's never the perfect meeting because it's never the perfect plan, and then you try to do a better plan. And a week later, you're still meeting and you're still planning. Or you can do what we did. We began cooking. We began finding the food, the generators. Is always food somewhere. We began finding the helpers. Before we knew, we reached 120, 150,000 meals a day. Before we knew, we had 26 kitchens across the island serving even Vieques and Culebra daily. Before we knew, we reached 4 million meals. What we did was bringing the power of the people to help the people. Very often, when emergencies happen, we only think the helicopter mentality. Somebody has to come from the outside to help. Obviously, I came from the outside. But who took care of helping Puerto Rico were the people of Puerto Rico. Right now, okay, I'll shut up soon, I promise. Okay? It's Spanish and English. Completely now, okay. And as we are speaking now, right now the same people that delivered the 4 million meals in Puerto Rico, before this latest storm arrived, we put teams in Virgin Islands, we put teams in Dominican Republic, we set up teams in Puerto Rico, they were already there, and as we speak, they are almost getting to every single corner today, tomorrow, the next days, until nobody is not within the possibility of helping them. I said it at the beginning, big problems have very simple solutions. Start cooking and start reaching the people. That's how we did it, and that's how we keep doing it.
So I'm going to...
And I want to add, sometimes we all need wind behind the sails to move the ship forward. Many years ago, President Clinton, out of the blue, I was 26. I don't know, he mentioned me in a speech. He mentioned me like he mentioned so many others. I was 26. That speech, and he mentioning me as one of the volunteers that show up in a soup kitchen in DC, I'm not gonna lie to you, gave me this kind of extra strength to say, you know, we can all do more. So I forever will be thankful for President Clinton. And you know who kept me going in Puerto Rico? We have a documentary called We Fed People. You can watch it. You're gonna see me there at my best and at my worst, but trying just to solve the problems on behalf of the people. And in Puerto Rico, I was in this moment that was like, man, we can do so much more, and we are not doing enough. We can do more if we all come together. A person I barely knew, called Lorraine Jobs, showed up and told me, Jose, just keep feeding people. We'll find out how we keep moving this operation forward. So also forever, if Lorraine maybe wouldn't show up there, maybe we will never do what we did in Puerto Rico. So Lorraine, I don't think I've ever told you, but thank you for being you. Thank you.
And that is a perfect segue to Lorraine Powell-Jobs. I think it's the Russians.
I have three. Let me give you one. Actually, if I can add to something that Jose is talking about, they also had exquisite operations, and so in addition to galvanizing a lot of the kitchens on the island. They went to school kitchens, they went to home kitchens, they had the community-based chefs who all became galvanized. They also brought in a level of operational excellence and execution that wasted no time, no resources. They deployed everything with exquisite precision. So I think that's really important to say, because while it's true that you need a commitment to action, like CGI says, and you need the expertise both perhaps outside and inside, you also need a long adherence in the same direction. And that's what Jose and his team brings to every humanitarian need that they find. Not only in Puerto Rico, but Ukraine and Haiti and elsewhere.
You know, Laureen, what I love about the Emerson Collective that you founded and head is that it seems to embody this idea of public-private, of allying with different groups to try to solve hard problems. And I noticed that one of the problems you saw, which one would not think of as a public-private opportunity, was trying to deal with the extraordinary epidemic of gun violence in a city like Chicago. So talk about that as an example of what you do.
Sure. What we do at Emerson Collective is work with entrepreneurs both in the social sector and in the for-profit sector. So in addition to philanthropy, we also use venture funding and sometimes private equity. We work with artists and activists and advocates, but in general, everything is rooted within communities. So listening to the wisdom of communities and leveraging that and being, as Jose said, sometimes inside, sometimes outside, but always in partnership. So in the case of Chicago, Arne Duncan, after he came out of the Obama administration, returned to Chicago and wanted to work in deep community in south and west side of Chicago. When he was the head of Chicago Public Schools, he witnessed firsthand what it was like to have the devastating effects of gun violence in communities. And in Chicago, this big problem of gun violence is actually concentrated in 14 neighborhoods. It's not throughout the city, but it's in very distinct neighborhoods, and it's often block by block. So we started working block by block with individuals who were most at risk of gun violence, either as the perpetrator or as the victim. We have an 18-month program where we hire the individuals. We started with men, we now work with men and women, and we have a full holistic program that includes high school diploma, includes social emotional support, includes group support, includes coaching and mentoring, and job skills and training. And after the program, the men then can be employed elsewhere. What Arne found is that the men who go through our program have never had a first chance. He doesn't think of this as a second chance or any kind of redemption or remediation. This is actually the first chance that they have accessed this kind of opportunity, the first chance that anyone outside of the gangs was hiring, the first chance that anyone actually cared enough to see individuals and support each other. And we've seen dramatic and very exciting results, especially with the street outreach team support system. And we've gone very deep in 4 of the 14 communities. The results are undisputable. So both the city and the state have now matched our philanthropic funding and are taking it to scale, which is a great result.
Yeah.
So a lot of the issues that we can all talk about are issues that sometimes require philanthropic dollars to de-risk ideas and de-risk programs and pilots, and then we need the government and business sectors to take it to scale. And so that's what you see there, but that's what you see across the globe, and I know that's what CGI tries to do as well. We show demonstration of what's possible, and then ask for governments and businesses to pay attention and to actually scale this.
Wow. Jose, let me ask you about the biggest food crisis in the world right now, which stems from the Russian invasion of Ukraine. What can be done about that, and what is being done about it? Do you think it's enough?
Hola. Okay. No, I don't think we're doing enough. But I want to make sure that it's very clear. Ukraine has plenty of food to feed Ukraine. Then people are going to be asking me that they supported the efforts of World Central Kitchen. Why are you cooking and feeding in Ukraine? It's not a problem of lack of food. It's a problem of a country that is at war and a problem of logistics. And what we did was organize the logistics to make sure that nobody will be left without a plate of food. World Central Kitchen, I think was last week, we reached 160 million meals produced by 550 restaurants, almost between 1.5 million to 2 million meals delivered a day, around 7,500 places. At the end of the day, it's the same story of Puerto Rico. World Central Kitchen, which is an American-born NGO, didn't help Ukraine. The 5,000 Ukrainians we have, they've been feeding Ukrainians. And this is the way very much we try to do it every day. The money we got, this is what we did. We made sure that every dollar we got didn't go to throwing money at the problem. You could argue feeding people is not throwing money at the problem, but to me it is, because we can do more with that $1. Imagine for a second that we are able to activate restaurants that they were shut down, that those restaurants are all of a sudden can pay their teams, all of a sudden can be buying the fruits and vegetables from farmers and others. And in the process, we are feeding the hospitals, the shelters, and the people that need food. You see, every dollar we are able to multiply by 3. We're not only helping feed the people in Ukraine that needed aid, but in the process, somehow maintaining the economy in a moment of war. So this is very much the situation of Ukraine. This is other thing. We were able to help open factories that were shut down. We had big organizations bringing cereal to Ukraine. When Ukraine feeds 500 million people around the world with cereal, we need to be smart and logical. You don't need to be Einstein. If you can feed Ukrainians with the food that is in Ukraine, why are you bringing food from outside Ukraine? You bring what you don't have, but no more. This way, you are not only covering the short-term needs of the people that are leaving their homes because they are under shelling, they are under bombing, but in the process, really, you are giving them hope that everybody is fighting that war. Some people obviously are defending their country with weapons, but we learn that the humanitarian side is as important as anything else. Why? Because in the process, you make sure that the social system of Ukraine doesn't break apart, but the contrary. If anything, in the middle of the war, you make that social network stronger. That's what we've been doing next to the Ukrainian people. We went there 6 hours, 12 hours after the invasion of Russia. We began feeding in the border. We've never stopped since then. And again, when you do it with the locals and you empower the locals very much, nothing can stop you. And I want to take this moment just to say we got 2 cooks that they were sleeping in a place south of Kharkiv in a town called Chuihiv. And a missile hit a community center. And many people died, and 2 of our volunteer cooks died on that missile. When you see buildings, when you saw what I saw in Bucha, when you see what I saw in Irpin, everybody, if you're not speaking loud because you write, because you have social media, that this war and no war makes any sense, and that President Putin and Russia right now They've been killing for the last 200 days, children and women and elderly, not near any military location. They are killing people that could be you or I. This war must end yesterday, and we all need to speak louder about it.
Prime Minister, I wanted you to close for us by reminding us, in a sense, why Bill and Hillary Clinton restarted CGI, because of the urgency of the threats and the, in some sense, lack of progress. You know, when the UN set up its millennial goals, to a large extent they were achieved. Poverty was cut enormously, and then we faced a series of challenges. And now we're in a very different place where there's a lot of work to do. I know you talked to the UN General Assembly this morning about this. Tell us about that.
I think that we have to recognize that if we don't find the room to finance the normal development goals, the world is going to end up being a very inhospitable place. And we're not just going to be worrying about conflict in Ukraine or Tigray or Syria or Haiti or anywhere where it is happening. The bottom line is that the world looks too much like it did 100 years ago, but we should know better because we have the experience of 100 years ago, we have educated people, and we have a United Nations that is supposed to make a difference. Regrettably, there are a few countries from whom political action is needed. We need it to reform the international financial architecture. We need it to reform the UN. We saw the worst aspect of it when Russia chaired the UN in the very month that it went into Ukraine. How do you have a permanent five? How do you have a United Nations that still looks like an imperial order? And until we recognize that when that body was formed, there were only 50 nation states of the world. Today there are over 193. And we need to ensure that there's greater equity. How do you have a G20 that leaves out Africa, the African Union, that has 1.4 billion people? I really believe that the world needs global, moral, strategic leadership. It needs leadership that's moral and right because we have to do the right thing by our citizens. If not, they're not going to make it. We need it strategic because we can't fight every battle at once. And regrettably, there are too many people who are not heard, seen, or felt, and that's why I thank the Clinton Global Initiative for ensuring that our voices can also have equal value. You speak to Jose about Puerto Rico, but guess what? Dominica lost 226% of its GDP in Hurricane Maria on that same evening. And that's the problem with small island developing states. While the United States of America is hit every year with a hurricane, our countries that are small, when they're hit, don't have the capacity to recover easily. And that's the disparity we see in today's world. And regrettably, the global multilateral system does not reflect the balance that it needs. When the WTO was formed, we said we needed special and differential treatment for our small states because our share of global trade in goods is 0.000%. Our share of global trade in services is 0.001%. And since the formation, our manufacturing sector has gone down by 34% and our agricultural sector by 22%. When we say it with correspondent banking, you can open a bank here in minutes in this country and in Canada. In our part of the world, because of the loss of correspondent banking, it is 6 to 8 weeks, 3 months for companies. And we continue to have this practice of blacklisting. And when I ask who's on the blacklist, regrettably, it's all former colonies. And yet, when you looked for the money from who spent what and where the money was being taken from with the sanctions coming out of the Ukraine and the Russian oligarchs, you didn't come to the Caribbean for the money. You went to London, you went to New York, you went to Zurich, you went to Luxembourg. And that's the reality. And this world is simply too unfair. And we need the global South to stand up again and to recognize that we cannot continue to condemn our people to be innocent bystanders in a world that is making them victims. And we have to level out the playing field, and we have to give people an opportunity to make a difference.
Prime Minister, Laureen Powell-Jobs, Jose Andres, thank you very much, and thank you all for your support. That was terrific.
The need for oxygen, taken for granted by so many, was brought into sharp relief by COVID-19. Around the world, hospitals running out of oxygen made headlines. And yet this shortage has been a crisis in much of the world for years.
Many countries simply do not have enough oxygen available to assist sick patients as they struggle to breathe.
In far too many countries, particularly low-income ones, only 10% of patients who need medical oxygen will get the help that they require.
On one of my trips to Ethiopia, I witnessed a young boy, about 10 years old, die of asthma attack because they did not have oxygen. I felt helpless and hopeless at the same time. I said, I cannot even help this boy.
In 2016, a coalition of partners made a commitment at CGI to address this pressing global challenge. That commitment brought together medical experts, technology companies, science advisors, community volunteers, activists, and more to form United for Oxygen.
A problem of this magnitude can't be solved by just one person or one entity. It really takes the collective effort. We're blessed that with United for Oxygen, we have so many incredible groups coming together.
This potent partnership created a roadmap to help scale a solution to this global health equity crisis.
Now I can assist mothers and my community to handle those premature so that they can grow and become big men and big women.
CGI was built on the idea that one person working with others can together make a big difference.
Anyone could do something. It doesn't have to be big, just start small. One person could save one person. If we save that person could save the entire nation or the entire community.
Please welcome Andrew Cooper.
I grew up on a farm in South Africa, part of an anti-apartheid family. And I was there on the Union Building lawns in Pretoria, as was President Clinton the day Nelson Mandela was inaugurated. And no one could come away from that day without a sense that they needed as an individual to try to make the most change that they could. And I tried various careers, but about 15 years ago, I had an idea that is now called impact investing. 14 years ago, we stood on this stage with President Clinton with a commitment from a standing start to reach 25 million low-income people in developing countries with the financial tools they need to help them grow their businesses and meaningfully change their own lives. Impact was a new concept. Many people questioned perhaps my skills and my sanity. I was 33. I had a PhD in philosophy, not finance. But President Clinton believed in the idea and the people, a theme you'll hear throughout today, and gave us this platform. Today, against that 25 million person goal, Leapfrog's companies reach 250 million low-income people. Especially in Africa and Asia, providing essential healthcare and financial tools Millions upon millions of people are receiving insurance, loans, medications, diagnostic tests, and other financial and health services. And we have in fact raised from that standing start billions of dollars, such that now 5% of the world's low-income population are served by our companies. We have also co-founded an impact investing industry that stands at $1 trillion, and importantly have demonstrated that profound, impactful businesses can offer robust commercial returns, and thereby begun to open the gates of the capital markets with trillions of dollars in them to those purpose-driven businesses to end poverty on an unprecedented scale. Ten years ago, I came back. I like CGI. And again, made a commitment, a second commitment, to ensure that our companies would employ 50,000 people. Today, fast forwarding a little bit, our companies support 160,000 jobs. So that's 10 times the first commitment, 3 times the second commitment. Today, I'm thrilled to announce our third commitment, and it relates to what we call emerging enterprises, micro, small, and medium enterprises in the developing world. The World Bank estimates that 70% of jobs in developing countries come through such undertakings. We can be talking about a family in a stall, in a market, or a small farm, or a garment business that employs workers. These businesses, though, are systematically underfunded and are not well protected against economic, political, and climate shocks. For too long, these institutions, these businesses have succeeded against the odds, shackled. What if we could unshackle them? Today, I'd like to make a commitment that, again, in its ambition, may lead to many doubters, and again, we are determined to over-deliver on. Leapfrog companies will help finance or protect 25 million enterprises that support 100 million jobs in developing countries by 2030. We have to close that employment and skills gap. Leapfrog will expand its impact investing platform to provide these enterprises with the access to capital, insurance, business support, or data infrastructure that allows them to grow. We will also focus, as we have always passionately done, on enterprises led by women, as well as on enterprises that adopt clean technology. If we can do this, millions upon millions of entrepreneurs and workers will be empowered with the dignity of secure and sustainable jobs and the ability to change their own lives. They will be protected against shocks. They will have income that grows their communities. These businesses, remember, are the engines of growth. They are also the source of economic, political, and environmental stability. President Clinton and CGI, I cannot thank you enough for the support you have given, especially in those early days when perhaps only you and my mother believed. It's a great honor to effect change with so many partners. It, of course, will not be easy. We at Leapfrog don't have all the answers. None of us has all the answers. But I hope that, like the President, like CGI, like our investors, you will believe, you will support our team to achieve another seemingly impossible dream. And together, we will take action. We will take the leap. Thank you.
Please welcome Vanessa Carey and Desta Laku.
Good morning. I'm Desta Laku, and allow me please to welcome to the stage our partners, Dr. Ahmed Umma, who is represented by Dr. Taj Raji, Honorable Kumbizi Kandodo Chiponda, Minister of Health of Malawi, the Honorable Dr. Jane Acheng, Minister of Health of Uganda, the Honorable Dr. Austin Demby, Minister of Health of Sierra Leone. They've come a long way. We stand before you today to make this landmark commitment for our continent of Africa. We are determined to have our own health narrative. Africa today bears 25% of the world's disease burden, but has only 3% of the world's health workforce. The COVID-19 pandemic has brought this into even more sharper focus. And now we are at a pivotal moment. Country-led, country-owned action is critical to ensure community access to care and prepare us for future emergencies. And that is why today, AMREF Health Africa, Seed Global Health, working with these esteemed ministers of health and leveraging on the Africa CDC platforms, we commit to establish a strategic and replicable roadmap for a robust, fit-for-purpose health workforce for Africa. We hope this will accelerate addressing the health workforce shortage for our continent of 1.2 billion people once and for all. This 5-year commitment, $100 million commitment, will scale and strengthen our health workforce, including nurses, midwives, frontline and emergency health workers, roll out national health strategies, digital health strategies to reach the last mile communities, and support equitable health service delivery.
These investments will not only respond to the myriad crises today, but fuel resiliency in our collective future. We must choose to be accountable to our global community, to our partners, and to this moment. We can no longer afford incremental siloed investments and marginal shifts. That is why we stand before you united to make this commitment, one that is vested in listening to the needs and priorities of our partners and working audaciously, ambitiously, and unapologetically in service to them. We have seen firsthand in our work at Seed Global Health, AMREF, and in these countries that when the ministries are supported and health systems are strengthened, populations are healthier, and the devastating impact of pandemics are averted. Our partners have outlined an important call to action, and we will answer them, igniting a movement in which every country can prioritize its health workforce capacity as a critical, necessary, and leading lever for universal health care, and with the structures, systems, and resources needed to support them. These workforce investments are an investment in all of us. Our pandemic preparedness, vaccine delivery, strengthened economies, climate adaptation, social inclusion and women's rights, and community, national, and global security. We can go farther and faster if we do not go alone. This commitment is going to require a groundswell of support from government to civil society to business and beyond, to all of those with a shared goal of a more equal and prosperous future. There is no such thing as too ambitious for the challenges we face today. The status quo is no longer acceptable. We must choose to invest in our human sustainability, and the workforce that is so essential to protecting it. Thank you.
Please welcome David Fagenbaum.
We've tried everything. There's nothing else that we can do. I heard those words, but between the unbearable pain and all of my organs shutting down, I didn't really understand what my doctors meant until my family came into the room to say their final goodbyes, and a priest read me my last rites. I was 25 years old. Just 6 months earlier, I was a former college quarterback and a medical student trained to become an oncologist in memory of my mom when I became critically ill with a rare and deadly illness called Castleman disease. In a last-ditch effort to save my life, my doctors had tried a combination of 7 chemotherapies. Somehow I survived, but I relapsed and nearly died 4 more times in 3 years and knew that I wouldn't likely survive another one. My only hope would be to find an existing drug that could be repurposed for me. I knew it was possible because many diseases share the same underlying problems and can thus be treated with the same treatments. So I began studying my own samples in the lab and found a drug that emerged from the data, sirolimus. It had been on my pharmacy shelf all along for other diseases, but had never been used for my disease. I began testing it on myself, and after nearly dying 5 times in 3 years, I've been alive for the last 8 years. During this remission, I married the love of my life, Caitlin, had 2 beautiful children, wrote a book about my journey chasing my cure, and joined the faculty at the University of Pennsylvania to continue chasing cures. We've already discovered and advanced 10 more repurposed treatments for Castleman disease and cancer, as well as COVID-19 treatments, which have each saved countless lives. These patients are alive today because of cures we uncovered that were hiding in plain sight. But so much more work still needs to be done. In fact, humankind has only developed about 3,000 drugs that are approved for about 3,000 diseases. And the other 9,000 human diseases don't have a single FDA-approved therapy. That means that 1 in 10 of you, 1 in 10 of your children, and 1 in 10 of your grandchildren either has or will develop a disease that doesn't have a single treatment. And 1 in 3 of these kids will not survive to kindergarten. Even though repurposing existing drugs for these diseases is much faster and less expensive than new drug development, cures like my own sit on the pharmacy shelf because of 3 systemic barriers. First, no centralized database exists that matches drugs with potential diseases. Second, there are insufficient incentives for companies to repurpose drugs, especially cheap generic drugs. So there are known opportunities for cures that no one is pursuing. And third, no organization is responsible for unlocking the full potential of every drug. Not the NIH, not the FDA, not pharma, no one. Until now. Today, I am excited to announce the launch of Every Cure and everycure.org, a nonprofit organization on a mission to unlock the full potential of each and every drug to cure each and every disease possible. Together with partners in pharma, philanthropy, tech, and medicine, we are building a comprehensive open source database of drug repurposing opportunities and have already received data and donations totaling $4 million towards the $12 million we need to launch this year. A pilot of the first 147 diseases has already unlocked 106 drug repurposing opportunities. And with every additional $3 million raised, we will perform clinical trials of a promising drug in a new disease, about 500 times less expensive than new drug development. And since we're focusing on the 90% of drugs that are already generic and widely accessible, This will have an incredibly huge impact across the world on health equity right away. There is no greater impact in terms of saving lives. I'm not supposed to be here, and I don't know how much longer I will be. But as long as I'm alive, and there are patients like Raj, Lisa, and Gary waiting for cures, we're going to continue to chase them. But we can't do it alone. The three things we need right now are: one, funding to accelerate the database launch and launch trials; two, tech partners to fully leverage the power of AI to predict promising treatments; and three, data sets from healthcare companies to feed the engine. Please join us to unlock every cure so that no patient is ever told, "We've tried everything," when a life-saving cure is on the pharmacy shelf. Thank you so much.
And now, please welcome Alan Jope, Larry Fink, Damlola Ogumbi, and President Bill Clinton.
Thank you. First of all, a point of personal privilege. I hope you enjoyed David Feigenbaum's presentation. He's a remarkable man. And I read his book and called him and thought he ought to be here. And I think I wish the federal government would fund what he's trying to do, but we could fund half of it here. But you just think about it. Think if you had a rare disease that you thought there was a reasonably good chance could be successfully treated by something else, you'd want to look into it, I think. So I thank him. Now, I want to ask our participants a couple of questions that I think are highly relevant. First of all, let's start with Larry Fink. I want to thank you for a lot of things. I want to thank you for urging people to consider the social impact of their investments and try not just to go for a quick rate of return if it's damaging to society, but instead to try to build a future we could all share. But what does that mean now? Well, what's going to happen? What do you think for the next 6-7 months? How's Russia going to play into this? How's the pandemic going to play into this? It won't go away, and it won't kill us, apparently. So where are we, and what do you think now?
Well, Mr. President, thank you for inviting me here. It's an honor to be here. Well, the next 7 months, we're in a transition, and it's not going to be a pretty transition. We have food insecurity worldwide, which is going to be creating more elevated prices. We have not seen all the increases that we should expect to see in food. We have imbalances in energy right now in the short term. And then on top of that, we have the European government, the UK government, and the United States government doing quite a large amount of fiscal stimulus at a time when we're seeing record inflation. There are many bad policies that got us there, but we're living in this period of time now with really elevated inflation, high on insecurity. And I would say probably the most important thing that we're missing right now And this is something that over the last 34 years building BlackRock, we build BlackRock on the foundation of hope. Hope is missing in the world right now. The polarization of ideas, the polarization of political opinions has really created more and more confusion. And there's just growing fear. And that growing fear is showing up in so many areas, where even getting people back into the office. U.S. productivity fell 7% in the first quarter and 4% in the second quarter. So we are seeing declining productivity, which is adding to the inflation area. So we're in a world right now that is uncertain. I am optimistic that we will be out of this transition as we find new sources of food, building more things, as we focus on decarbonization technology to elevate power in so many parts of the world. And at the same time, we're going to have to find more sources of gas in the short run as the transition fuel during the decarbonization period. So all of this is a period of time of great uncertainty, and we need leadership desperately to bring back hope. And that's probably the greatest thing that I see and hear from our clients worldwide, that whether it's the war in Ukraine or the questions about, of China and what is the role of China going to be post-party Congress. So all of this, last Thursday I had a long conversation with President Zelensky on hope, on how we can move forward in Ukraine. And so there are pockets of ideas and pockets of, I would say, leadership to provide hope, but we're not going to get out of this situation in the next 6-7 months, and we're going to have to endure this for a period of time. Whether that period of time is 12 months or 5 years, I hope it's 12 months and not 5 years.
Thank you. I want to say one thing about Larry that I really admire, quite apart from the fact that he's not a climate change denier.
I'm the target of all those.
This may be more important. I think one of the 2 or 3 factors most responsible for an unsustainable rate of inequality in the world today is that decades ago, actually, when Hillary and I were in law school, that's a long time ago, in the United States and elsewhere, people stopped teaching corporate law the way it used to be taught. Corporations, when I was a kid coming up and when I went to law school, were creatures of the state who had responsibilities to all their stakeholders. Yes, they're investors, but also their employees, their suppliers, their customers, and the communities of which they were a part. Then there was a whole long period of time when basically it was the stakeholders here, the shareholders here, and everybody else down here for many places, especially in the United States. And he's tried to bring back the balance, not just for climate change, but for the health of society as a whole. And I'm very grateful to you for that. So, Damilola, UN Sustainable Energy for All occupy a real growing space connecting the United Nations, state actors, and the private sector in pursuing the UN Sustainable Development Goals, especially number 7, which is sustainable energy for all of us. So talk to the audience here about the importance of equitable access to clean energy. While a lot of the world is focused on decarbonizing the economy, unless it's done in an equitable way, in the end, the effort won't succeed, I don't think. So talk to us a little about what you're trying to do with your organization.
Thank you, Mr. President, for having me today and to speak about such a important topic that we sometimes leave without, and that's energy poverty. And energy poverty easily affects 1 billion people, of which 600 million reside in Africa. So when we think about a just and equitable energy transition, we can't think of one half of the world and leave out the developing countries. The truth of the matter is climate development and energy have to go hand in hand. We don't have to do one and then the other and then come back. And what we're seeing is that the policies and the decisions that are being made by the developed countries are not just and they're not equitable as they relate to the developing world. There is no scenario of having 1 billion people left in energy poverty and still achieving your climate goals. It just doesn't happen. Because if you take Africa as a continent, and you maybe sub-Saharan Africa and you remove South Africa, you've got 81 gigawatts of energy. That means being born Black African like myself, I'm 20 times at disadvantage energy-wise as any other human being on Earth, just being born on that continent. That is a huge issue, and that is where the equity comes in. And that is where energy access, not just energy access in terms of you go to a community and you give them some lighting, energy for industrialization, energy for SMEs, has to come in. And we're in such a unique position now, because we're starting at such a low base, it can be a low carbon trajectory. Because, I was in Kigali the other day and I was talking about energy transition, and understandably some of the ministers there was like, can we transition to energy first? And we laughed about it, but it was very, very true. There's just not enough of it. You still have, in my country, Nigeria, 100 million people without access to energy at all. And most of this affects women and children worse because women are still using fuel wood, which causes massive deforestation, which is also a climate issue. So we really have to have energy and leaving no one behind as the center of everything we do. Our energy transition has to be a people-centered energy transition, and the developing world has to be taken along. We see for the first time in a long time that you have African heads of state talking about climate. They're talking about transition. But what is missing is the financing. You have less than, I think, you have about 4% of global energy financing coming into the African space, and we know that's not all renewable. So the truth is that if you have countries that want to transition and want to do the right thing, they don't have the financing to actually follow that transition. And that is a very important part. The other part, and I'll close on this, is that we have to understand that as a global community, the key thing we can do, especially in this time of crisis, is energy efficiency. So the developed world has to use less for the developing world to develop. It's not a maybe thing, it just has to happen. So the best fuel we can have is energy efficiency, and we've seen it in Europe, right? With the rise in the energy bills, people are using less. So we can use less, and we must use less, and that's what we have to do. We need to support developing countries, especially African economies, in the full transition, knowing that their transition is about development first, energy access, and it can be done in a low carbon trajectory. Thank you.
So, Alan, Unilever was one of the first Fortune 500 companies to sort of embed sustainability in its core business practices. And I think you've pledged to reach zero emissions across your value chain by 2039. You must have evidence that you can do this, or you wouldn't be saying it. So make the case based on your evidence for the people here who might like to do what you're doing but think it's not economically feasible.
Love the challenging question, Mr. President. Of course, when you were being taught at law school, you were taught about fiduciary responsibility. And I think most chief execs carry around that sense of fiduciary responsibility and wear it heavily. There is an element of risk and risk avoidance associated with trying to run a business on a sustainable platform. Right now, our company in Pakistan, one of our finest businesses around the world, is underwater. We'll push through that, but it's not a great place to be selling food or personal care products when you're underwater or on fire. But I want to shift the emphasis away from risk to opportunity, the other side of fiduciary responsibility. The evidence is building so quickly that people want to buy products from companies and brands that operate to high standards of sustainable behavior and ethical conduct. And our brands, which people see as making a positive contribution to society or the planet, are growing 3 times faster than the rest of our portfolio. It's a simple matter of consumer choice. There are often costs in the short term, but we've saved about 1.2 billion euros through sustainable sourcing. This need not be an on-cost. And of course, there's the reputational side of sustainability. Unilever is now the employer of choice in 50 countries around the world in our sector because it's a magnet for young talent. People want to come and join companies where they can make a positive impact. So just to be unambiguous, Unilever is not an NGO. We're a for-profit organization. And our commitment to sustainable business and proper conduct is very strongly driven by serving our shareholders as a consequence of serving our people, our customers, our societies, and the communities that we do business in.
Well, first of all, thank you for saying that. And I should note that we have had for years and years and years lots of evidence, even in the go-go years of the stock market, that over any 5-year period, companies that run for the benefit of all of its constituents will produce a more steady profit than those who think of only the stock price. So it's a real inspiration for those of us who seem like we're screaming at the wind half the time to know that there are people like you guys doing this. Damilola, Africa is basically becoming, I think, a fascinating laboratory for renewable energy investment. By 2050, there'll be 2 billion people in Africa. It'll be one of the few growing population areas on the planet. With about 40% of the world's children will be born there. But if we keep going the way we're going, less than half of them will have access to electricity. So I know this maybe seem to a lot of you two inconsistent conversations we're having here, that they have to have power to have a decent standard of living, and it has to be as carbon-free as possible, not to further burden the ecosystem. So talk about that, how you think we should go from here in terms of getting the scale of investment necessary to meet the unprecedented needs and to do it in a way that ensures that we'll continue to improve our chances of survival against climate change.
Thank you again, Mr. President. I think you said it well in terms of there's no graph, there's no correlation saying you have no energy and you live a good life. You know, to live a decent, equitable life just as a human being, you need energy. Energy is even in the Sustainable Development Goals. If we don't achieve SDG 7, we can't achieve our health outcomes, we can't achieve our gender outcomes, we can't achieve our climate outcomes. So that link between true development, energy, and climate, like I said earlier, is so apparent now, and especially apparent after all the crises we've been through together. To put it back to the African context, the truth of the matter is things are getting worse because the electricity population is outpacing electricity connections, right? And we all know that there's going to be at least 20% of, extreme poverty hitting the African continent. There's some countries now that are doing minus GDP. So this is the time you have to invest. And again, for the first time, instead of having development plans, energy plans, electricity plans, you can actually have it in one. So we, at our organization, feel that there are kind of 3 main things. One, the use of data. You know, the data to help policymakers understand what you have to do from now till 2050 or 2060 when you get to net zero. But it has to be your priorities, and we need to localize it. We do a great job on these regional plans and continental plans and what to do with Africa. Africa is a continent, it's not a country. And we should stop talking about it like that. So we need to take what government priorities are. We did one recently for Nigeria, and what it showed was, because Nigeria is also one of the biggest oil and gas nations, is that for Nigeria as a country to transition by 2060 and get to a point of net zero with their priorities, which is to make sure 100 million people get out of poverty, to make sure they do industrialize and to do it in low carbon, it's going to cost $410 billion. Above business as usual spending. The transition itself is 1.9 trillion. So when we talk and tell countries to do things, we have to have the data on the table, and we need to help them with implementation. And that's why support from organizations like yourself is so critical. The next part is showing governments where the money is going to come from. Because at the end of the day, plans are as great as plans, but if you don't show them the implementation pathways, they're not going to do it. And then this is what's going to typically happen. You're going to have the proliferation of what we have now, which is about 100 million diesel and petrol generating sets all across the continent that we can't capture. We don't know where they are, and we can't stop them. They're much more harmful than any coal-fired power plant. And no one ever talks about the damage that that actually does and what it actually does for mortality rates for a lot of communities. And then finally, the supply chains. Currently now, even if you are doing a renewable project in Africa, it takes something on the lines of about, if you are lucky, 3 to 6 months to bring in 3 basic pieces of equipment: solar panels, inverters, or lithium batteries. That isn't sustainable in a crisis mode. You need to start thinking about, if not manufacturing on continent, but how do you assemble on continent and make sure these renewable items, at least for solar power, is available? Because we all know that at least, I don't know, 350 million Africans that don't have electricity can be powered by decentralized solar. So sorry for my long response, but this is a really important point.
So, Larry, let's go back around it. Clearly, what she said is right. We got to have money to power this shift, what you have forecasted as a tectonic shift as the world prepares for a decarbonized future. So how are we going to get from where we are now to where we need to go?
Well, the tectonic shift is happening. We're seeing that in evidence by where crops are being produced and where they're not being produced. So we are seeing big shifts, or because of heat and drought, we're seeing crops moving. And so we're seeing evidence every day that climate risk is investment risk. And people are waking up to that, and that's creating this tectonic shift. And we're seeing evidence, whether that is in sequestration of carbon, and we're going to be working with many large energy companies on the sequestration, because they own these big caverns that were once caverns filled with hydrocarbons, and now they're empty. And so we're going to be using that. And so we are not going to get to a decarbonized world unless we have the ability to sequester, carbon. At the same time, because of the rising energy prices, we are certainly seeing the green premium shrink quite considerably. And so the amount of investment dollars that are going into new decarbonization technology is accelerating, and accelerating very rapidly, whether that is moving towards green and blue hydrogen. And obviously, solar and wind, that's already there, but obviously now we have to really create a permanence of that type of supply through battery and storage. But we are seeing evidence by investors worldwide who are moving towards more decarbonization technology. At the same time, we are seeing the continuation of need to be using gas as a transition fuel away from other forms of hydrocarbon. But more than ever before, we are seeing more and more evidence of that. But if we are going to change the world, there's just not enough money that's going to go into the emerging world. And we must change the charters of the IMF and the World Bank, or we're not going to get there. There's just not enough capital. It is estimated to decarbonize the emerging world is $1 trillion a year. We're talking maybe $100 billion is moving into the emerging world. And so, but there's huge pools of capital, but that capital is just not equipped to be taking the first loss piece. And so if we're really serious about the notion of moving the world faster so our children and grandchildren can have that bright future, it has to be done in a way that we're bringing all the governments together. We have to relook at the responsibilities and the roles of the World Bank and the IMF, and they play important roles. They have important connections with all these countries. But we need to find a way to stop thinking about a project here and a project there. That's happening, but it's happening at such a slow rate, we are not going to get there. We're fooling ourselves to think that one project, which may be a significant project, is going to decarbonize the world at the time that we need. And so we have to have a holistic review of how we are going to get there. And obviously we have COP27 coming up in Egypt and COP28 in Abu Dhabi, and hopefully in these forums that we are going to bring this together and start really thinking about it. But it's up to the equity owners of these agencies, basically the G20, and they have to have a desire to doing this instead of just the words. They have to have the desire. If we can do that, the amount of capital that's going to go into the emerging world, into Africa, will be extraordinary. And I do believe there is that opportunity in the next few years to do this, and then we will have not just a tectonic shift in the developed world, but a tectonic shift in all of the world.
Before we go, I know we're running late, but I think it's as important. Talk a little about how Unilever fits into what Larry just said. You know, not every company lends itself as easily as some do to environmentally responsible production and distribution, but what do you want to say about that to other countries, companies in other countries?
You know, in 1939, George Orwell wrote that we have sunk to such depths that stating the obvious is the first responsibility of every person. And he was talking about a book on power written by Bertrand Russell, but it applies to today. Because stating the obvious that we have an emergency, we have a climate emergency, is becoming an unpopular thing to do. This anti-sustainability backlash, this anti-woke backlash, is incredibly dangerous for the world. And the first thing that Unilever will do is we will not back down on this agenda, despite these populist accusations. The second thing I would say is there are many commitments out there, but not very many plans. And we were the first company in the world to voluntarily put our decarbonization plan to a shareholder vote. We were a bit worried about it. Some of our board thought that we were going too far. Some thought we might not be going far enough. And it squeaked through with 99.6% shareholder support, led, may I say, by BlackRock, who are, in my opinion, one of the finest commentators on sustainability and what companies should be doing. And the final point is, once you have a plan, we need metrics, because at the moment we're consistently reporting financial metrics around the world, but we're at great danger right now of fragmenting the reporting of non-financial metrics. There's a US initiative from the SEC, there's a Global Sustainability Board initiative, and the Europeans are setting off on their own path. And we need to go a little bit slower to go faster on consistent reporting of sustainability metrics. And that's how the flows that Larry and Dami are calling for will happen when you can measure it. Thank you.
Well, I wish I could keep you here the rest of the day. I'm going to ask this. You got to be real quick now because they're going to kill me. Who's going to come up with all the money, Damalola, to do what Nigeria wants to do? Get to net zero by 2060. That's $410 billion. Who's going to come up with that?
Sorry about that. I think first, just like Alan said, first recognize it's a crisis. And, you know, just how we found, is it 14 or 17 trillion for COVID? The money must be there somewhere. I also think there will be multiple things. I think the global north has a responsibility because they're the ones who cause a lot of the climate crisis that affects the global south, most of the budgets of governments. I think voluntary carbon markets is going to play a bigger role, especially in the African context. And then the DFIs have to really step up. You know, the DFIs of maybe 33% of the money they're meant to spend for energy has actually been spent. So there's still like 27 billion around. So yeah, those are the key things that I think will need to happen.
Very quickly, it can only be the private sector. There is not enough money in government purses. There's nowhere near enough money in philanthropy. It requires the mobilization of the private sector to generate the types of sums that Larry's talking about.
Let me ask you, Larry, this is a problem for you, but I want to know how you take an argument that looks like it's the easiest big reduction for the lowest cost and make it sexy enough to attract capital and copying. And in most cities in the United States, 70% of the emissions are from the built environment, from buildings that are already standing. When you have people in all kinds of countries in sub-Saharan Africa that don't have enough buildings standing. So, and yet we have known for a long time. I worked on the Empire State Building retrofit starting in 2007. And when 2019 or 20, we announced another go around, and now it's being done. They're gonna, over 13 years, reduce in a almost 100-year-old building their emissions by 85%. But it's because the people who run the Empire State Trust are committed to it and they are interested, but it's very hard to organize this on a massive scale, even though in city after city after city, most emissions are in the built environment. And even in the efficient ones, it's normally over 60%, but typically it'll be 70. So how do we do what you want to do, which is to get the necessary energy, but be as clean as possible, and do what you know we have to do, which is to change the energy mix and to try to drastically reduce our carbon footprint? If arguably the least expensive option apparently has too many moving parts and not enough sex appeal to get the result we want. How do we fix that? How does finance fix that?
Well, I think finance is fixing it, and Alan spoke about it. Our stakeholders are demanding it more than ever before. Our young people, and over 52% of our people have been at the firm only 5 years or less, and they're demanding it, and we're hearing this from every company now. I think the most important thing that we need to get is making sure, as Ellen also talked about, is we need to have a common taxonomy that we could be all judging each people, correctly. But more importantly, the stakeholders are moving this forward, and it's moving very rapidly. And so as a result of it, we are starting to see more and more allocation of capital moving towards that area. But let's be clear. all the money that we are responsible for, none of it's our money. And so our job is to inform and educate and help. And there are going to be some money where we manage money where they are 100% set on hydrocarbons, and our job is to try to help them understand, the alternatives too. And then there's more and more money that is moving into more decarbonization, more and more money that is looking to find solutions. But if you look at Europe, Europe is moving much faster than the United States. The United States, in many ways, in many states, is moving backwards. Actually, Asia is moving very rapidly too. And I think China is a great example of what's happening in the world right now. So China built more coal factories last year than any other time they ever did, but they built more wind turbines than the sum of the rest of the world. And so that's the dichotomy we're living in today. Our job is to educate, inform, help understand that more and more people realize that climate risk is investment risk over the long term. Through stakeholder capitalism, we're going to see more and more money move more rapidly.
Last word?
Last word is confront the problem. So a friend of yours said you have to confront inconvenient truths. We have an inconvenient truth.
Last word?
You can't resolve the climate crisis and leave the developing world as it is.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. Let's give them a hand. Thank you.